coming up.
See, I don't think so, Speaker. Oftentimes women don't report harassment because men in spaces of power where they have demonstrable past experiences of holding on to that power and protecting those in their circle, that's where justice isn't served. And so my concern with your partisanship is mostly to do with this issue. We are discussing a very serious issue here. This is something that impacts all MPs. And I am not sure that if I reported something to you, that you would treat me fairly.
So today there's an ongoing debate about your partisan actions and whether you should remain a speaker. There'll be a vote.
This guy's garage. Like and subscribe.
This is the House's exclusive right to discipline its members. Through these powers, the House has tools to hold any member accountable for any action that may be viewed as conduct unbecoming and misbehavior, including in the exercise of their individual right to freedom of speech.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Speaker. Speaker, you're responsible for overseeing the harassment policy for the House of Commons. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Would you characterize a physical altercation between members in the chamber as a potential instance of harassment?
Well, to be clear, that would be more of I should just modify the first. I'm responsible for the sexual harassment between members, as it was listed. If there was a physical altercation, yes, that would be behavior that would be considered unbecoming.
Thank you. On May 18th, 2016, the Prime Minister grabbed late Conservative MP Gord Brown by the arm and then elbowed former NDP MP Ruth Ellen Brosseau in the chest. Ms. Brosseau expressed that she had been injured, and in that moment, you're recorded on the Hansard as saying, you described Ms. Brosseau's complaint as reminiscent of a dive in the 2006 World Cup, and that she was exaggerating. On what basis did you arrive at the finding that Ms. Brosseau was either diving or exaggerating what had happened in the House?
If I recall, my statement on that wasn't in regard to Madame Brosseau's accounting of the incident, but of other folks' accounting of the incident, which was...
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
So are you saying she experienced it differently than what she had said in the House?
No, I think she experienced it exactly the way she expressed it in the House.
Yet you said it was... I'm just curious at how you arrived that it was a dive.
I was commenting on how other people were characterizing, not what Madame Brosseau had said, but what other people had described it as being.
Well, your exact statement was it happened exactly as the Prime Minister had described it. So I guess that's your statement, and you're now responsible for overseeing the harassment policy. Given that this instance and the numerous instances of partisanship you've been accused of while you've been sitting in your term as chair, do you think that opposition MPs would feel safe or empowered to report instances of any sort of harassment, given that this department comes under your supervision?
They could have complete confidence that issues of harassment, if it's raised, will be given the full and treatment under my office.
See, I don't think so, Speaker. Oftentimes women don't report harassment because men in spaces of power where they have demonstrable past experiences of holding on to that power and protecting those in their circle, that's where justice isn't served. And so my concern with your partisanship is mostly to do with this issue. We are discussing a very serious issue here. This is something that impacts all MPs. And I am not sure that if I reported something to you, that you would treat me fairly, that I wouldn't have my issue twisted for partisan gain because of the repeated instances of partisanship. And that's why I have lost faith in your speakership. So given all of this, do you think that the fact that I have to ask this question or make these statements will prevent MPs or staff members coming forward from reporting instances of harassment because of your track record in this issue?
I don't believe so. I believe that members should feel fully confident in my ability to ensure that they are given every and to the fullest extent of the rules that have been set forward by the House of Commons to bring, when they bring forward serious issues, such as harassment, especially sexual harassment, that it would be treated with the utmost seriousness and to the fullest extent possible.
Yet in the moment when you had an opportunity as a peer in the House of Commons to give a woman space and hear her argument out, your exact words were this: what happened was exactly as the Prime Minister had described it. If I came in and I said, this happened with a Liberal member or a Conservative member, whose side would you take?
I would clearly want to make sure that the process was entirely fair and that your story and that your concerns would be raised and pursued to the fullest possible extent.
How can I have that assurance?
That could happen.
How can I have that assurance
I'm
when you've
offering you
had
that
three clear instances of like being partisan while in the chair? Forget the fact that you were the Prime Minister's parliamentary secretary. Like, I'm saying this out of deep severity. That is, I believe you've lost my confidence because of this issue. You are in charge of the harassment policy, something that is very serious because it governs the workplace safety of everybody here. I just want to end with this. I don't understand why the NDP, given that this happened with one of their colleagues, is still propping you up. I don't get that. But again, I just want to give you, how could you in that moment, in showing a judge of fairness, supposed fairness, how could you arrive that this woman experienced it differently and that the Prime Minister, what basis did you use to make that comment in 2016?
Well, I can tell you that I never questioned Ruth Ann Brousseau's accounting of the situation.
You did. You said, I believe him, not I believe her. And that is what is wrong with every workplace around the world. And yet you demonstrated that in that moment. And deeply disappointing.
We have about 10 seconds left. Mr. Speaker, did you want to
just very quickly, once again, never doubted her accounting, and my characterization of it at the time was due to how
to gaslight me on that right now. Just
Mr. Hempel-Garner, I think either we have to let the clock run or we have to afford the Speaker the opportunity to respond. Mr. Speaker, did you want to take the last few seconds, or do you feel satisfied with the response?
I would just like to say that, again, just to make sure that the record stands, that my description of that event was an accounting of what other people had described her event, and not how she had put it on.
Okay, thank you very much.
What would you recommend? Is there anything that this committee could recommend to improve the civility in the House and understanding that the words that we use matter, that there are ramifications for sometimes the words that we use, and that some people out there are using that as a way to intimidate members of Parliament? Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. It's really important, once again, to note that the Speaker, according to the rules and the long-time tradition of this place, does not have a purview over what happens outside of the House, outside of committees. If, however, members, and this is the reason why I'm presuming that the committee had been struck to take a look at this issue, are free to propose solutions and perhaps could direct members themselves in determining what would be considered behavior that's unbecoming, could direct the Speaker to observe for that, but it has been a tradition that the Speaker doesn't go there for many reasons. And whatever this committee comes up with would have to be tempered, of course, with the long-standing traditions of this House to allow for as much as possible full and free ability to speak to issues. That is fundamental to the roles which we play as members of Parliament, and one that should always be looked at and should be minimized with the greatest of care.
So, as an institution that is patriarchal, that is colonial, that is that has seen some dark times, as our society has, how do we ensure that we're doing both? How do we find that balance? Because this conversation about harassment hinges on that, I think, and it is about respect. It is about understanding that we are truly all equal. So how do we balance that?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, we do have some of the most, we have these traditions which long precede even the existence of Canada, which are important traditions. They've withstood the test of time, but we also have to try to make it, we always have to continually take a look at how can we modernize these institutions to make it more reflective of what Canadians live and work in each day in their own workplaces. But we need to make sure that we always have that balance. It's just not easy. I don't have a quick answer, but I do agree that it would be very useful.
And to me, there's this delineation. Ultimately, though, do we set forward some rules? Do we put our mind to putting forward written down rules, or do we? There was sort of this idea that it seemed like we were getting to a point where this is about almost peer pressure, that we simply don't expect, or we have expectations of other members and they don't cross that line. Is that where we're at, in your opinion, as within your role?
Well, I think we can do both. So I think there is one aspect of it, of course, is that the committee can make recommendations to Parliament about changing the code of conduct of members and set out some guidelines. Not necessarily, you don't want a tax code of you shall not do this, in this kind of situation, but maybe some aspirational aspects as to what we would want members to live up to. And then allow, of course, the Board of Internal Economy to try to operationalize that, and then for members to pursue that. And then the other aspect of it is that, of course, there has to be some notion of peer pressure, I guess, from member to member in terms of what we would expect other members, how we comport ourselves, and how we would expect others to comport themselves.
Mr. Speaker, so your job is to oversee the parliamentary precinct, to be a referee in the House of Commons, and to oversee the House of Commons harassment policy. When performing these duties, would you agree that it's important to remain neutral?
Of course, I would agree that it's important to remain impartial. I hope all the decisions that I've pronounced in this place would be judged by any fair-minded person as being decisions that could stand the test of time and that were impartial.
So as part of this, you no longer attend the weekly meetings with Liberal MPs, caucus meetings, for example?
Absolutely.
With regard to the harassment policy, would you agree with me that it's important for the accuser and the accused to have confidence that they will be treated fairly according to the harassment policy, regardless of what party that they're a member of?
I would hope that they would feel that the process that was set up was one which allows them to both be able to feel free to express themselves, to raise the issues, and for it to be properly disputed.
So today there's an ongoing debate about your partisan actions and whether you should remain a speaker. There'll be a vote later today on that. The story for the fundraising event and the highly partisan language used was that it went out in error and that it was a commonly used template. Have you been given assurances from the Liberal Party that this is in fact the story and that this template was widely used by other MPs?
So you'll forgive me, Mr. Giovanni, but this is a matter which is before the House. It wouldn't be appropriate for me to comment on it right now before the House pronounces on this.
Okay, so if you haven't been given that assurance, or at least we can't confirm right now that you have been, do you think that MPs who want confidence and trust in the harassment policy should be concerned about the judgment of the Liberal Party in using the office of the Speaker for partisan purposes?
Again, Mr. Giovanni, you're putting me in a very uncomfortable situation. I would love to be able to comment on this issue. It just wouldn't be appropriate for me to do so when this matter is before the House.
Okay. Well, why don't we zoom out then? We can zoom out to make you a little more comfortable from what we're talking about in the House today. Just generally speaking, do you have a policy on how to avoid this sort of partisanship from bleeding into your activities as the Speaker of the House?
As was discussed before this committee, and as was reported on before this committee back in December, and it was reported to the House at the end of January, there are a whole bunch of recommendations on that front, and there are general guidelines which are provided for in the rules of procedure. But as was, I believe, if you were to take a look at the committee report, you will discover that there was a conclusion that these guidelines were vague at best.
I would say it is unfortunate that when we're discussing an important policy like this one, that the discussion is sort of marred by your inability to address some of these concerns. And I would just recall that following your address to the Ontario Liberal Party convention, which also raised concerns about partisanship, you said it was an error and apologized. Following the most recent partisan intervention, you said it was an error and it won't happen again. Before MPs vote tonight on if you should remain chair, why should we believe you?
It's a long-standing tradition in this House, of course, that when members withdraw or apologize for a comment, that the member is taken at his or her word.
I've listened carefully to you since the beginning of the meeting. You've spoken about decorum, about the intent of members when they make remarks. You are at the very heart of another question of privilege concerning your partisanship. Partisanship in the House of Commons as well as outside of the House of Commons. You have a somewhat elastic idea of what partisanship seems to mean. You are supposed to be the arbiter of debate. You adjudicate the debate. And you have to look to the intentions of the members in the House. But you find yourself faced with issues that have never before surfaced for any Speaker of the House. Why do you think that you should maintain the speakership? Well, as I said to your colleague from Durham, I cannot speak to this matter that is before the House. It is before the House right now. Well, when do you think it's time to resign? Well, sir, that is an issue, a matter that is before the House. But your personal perception, no, Mr. Berthold. I would like to give you a few more minutes, but there is no more time for you at this time. Behavior in the House that goes beyond debate, that transmits a notion of harassment. Would you be able to give us some answers about any instances of that? That is an excellent question, Madame Fortier. I can say to you that as a member since 2015 and as Speaker, I can say this. There are times when I wonder myself, does this moment go beyond what is acceptable? I can say this. I'm always concerned by tradition and by the standing orders of the House. They're very important. But I do ask myself this question. The behavior between members of Parliament, of any party, of all parties, is that behavior acceptable, and would it be acceptable in any other work environment? I would think the answer is no. However, this isn't like just any other work environment. We are debating ideas that involve confrontation. They're conflicting ideas sometimes, pointed questions, unexpected things, but is that acceptable?